Hey everybody! Happy Monday to everyone out there. I guess it will be Tuesday when everyone gets this. So happy Monday and Tuesday to everybody. This is episode 40 of the Ball and Chain podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mark Thomas. Thank you for joining us and listening to us. I'm coming to you from Southern California. I'll be in Vegas later this week for some excellent partner meetings. But in the meantime, today and tomorrow, I am here in our West Hollywood office. And excited for some Monday Night Football. I've got my Devontae Adams jersey on. When you're hearing this podcast tomorrow, hopefully it will have been a Packers win and blowout. And wrapping up the final 10, 12 games of the baseball season. Looking forward to the playoffs for that as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's kind of dive right into our episode today. I've got a really awesome and cool guest who is working on some very interesting things. I'd like to welcome Garrett Schwartz from the Gaming Society. How are you today, Garrett?
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me on. Doing awesome. Excited for the game as well tonight. We're going to see if Aaron Rodgers and the Pack bounce back after a scary week one. But, lucky for you, you're a Packers fan. I myself is a Giants fan. After this past Thursday in the Washington team, feels like my team season is already over this early into the season.
Don't say that. Like that division, the NFC East, I think is still very winnable for somebody that gets to 9 wins. And keep in mind, there's an extra game this year too, right? Yeah, I had the Washington football team at 11 in my conference pool, so I was really glad for that. And I mean, you can't jump off sides there, at the end. I mean, just if they made the field goal in the first try, then you live with it and you move on. But to have them miss it, jump off sides, and then give them another crack at it. It's really tough to generally overcome those things in the regular season, but it's not too late.
Yeah, honestly, probably could not have scripted a more painful ending to a game as a sports fan. But nonetheless, right. Really excited to be on. Look, I think what you guys are building at Zen Sports and Gaming Society, we're both looking at this really exciting category of sports betting in a way that's unique. You guys really tapping into the social lever of the category. I think sports betting is inherently social. So, I think we view that the same as Gaming Society. And I think too, what you guys are doing, I'm excited to chat more about, is, presenting sports betting in a way that is a little bit more digestible and a little bit more easy and simpler to understand for, again, a category that up until 3 years ago was entirely foreign to most sports fans in the US.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable how quickly it has accelerated in the last few years since PASPA got struck down. Kind of took a little bit of time, the first 9 months to get going. And then once it did, from like early 2019 to now, it's just been an accelerant. And then it's to the point where, like for us in California, and obviously those in places like Texas and Florida that don't have it yet, I have people all the time coming up to me saying, I don't understand. Why is it not legal here? Like, what's going on? It's like, it feels like it's legal everywhere else, especially, the other more populous states. So it's a little frustrating that, for example, California and, Texas and Florida really haven't been able to get their act together on that. I mean, it's free tax revenue. It's all additive in terms of the revenues that they could get from it. So yeah, really hope they can get it going, because I mean, it's moving like gangbusters in the rest of the country.
No, absolutely. Right. I'm living in California, but from South Florida. So I know Florida passed some legislation and, they'll be there soon.
Yeah.
But look, I think just the general sentiment that betting is still really new, even for the states that came online 3 years ago in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And there's still, a handful of others coming online in the next couple of months. The idea that there's a need in the category for brands and companies and people and platforms to make sports betting more accessible, more approachable, more inclusive, and easier to understand. We really believe there's a strong demand for that, because at the end of the day, again, betting just is a foreign language for a lot of people, even active sports bettors. We forget the way of placing a bet up until, again, a couple of years ago was through a verbal exchange with a bookie, right? Who oftentimes presented as a filter as a way of placing a bet. So even active sports bettors and people who've been placing bets for decades, we found that they're struggling with betting terminology, lines and odds, as well as they're now transitioning to online legal platforms where, again, betting is kind of presented in official terms with terminology, lines and odds. But again, it's an entirely visual presentation when again, before it was really this verbal exchange outside of Vegas and Atlantic City.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's moving quickly, not just in terms of just being online, but in terms of the mobile features and setup. Completely agree with you that it's moving quickly. Then like in the case of Zen Sports, even going beyond that and offering things like peer-to-peer and creating your own bets with your own odds and cryptocurrency piece like we do. I mean, it's pretty neat how fast it's the evolution of it is going through. So why don't we kind of kick into gear here, what you're doing at Gaming Society. Tell our listening audience, what is it all about? What does the Gaming Society do? What do you do in your role there at the Gaming Society, and what it's all about?
You got it. So Gaming Society is a content and gamification platform really looking to democratize sports betting for all sports fans. Like we were just talking about, it's easy to forget that up until 3 years ago, sports betting didn't exist outside of 2 cities in the US. And here we are today, legal in over 30 states, sports books inside pro sports arenas, turning on your television and betting, whether in the broadcast or through advertising, a part of pretty much every single sports programming you could find. But despite the fact that betting is growing so rapidly, and millions of more fans are having access to sports betting, it really doesn't make up for the fact that we believe the category still is intimidating, inaccessible, and difficult to understand for most fans. So what Gaming Society is looking to do, again, through content and gamification, is really pull 3 key levers to try and onboard who we believe is the 85 million fans interested in the category, but either, again, haven't made the step to join it yet, or again, are part of the space and just still are struggling with some of the terminology, lines and odds to dive in even further. The first lever that we're really looking to pull at Gaming Society is inserting the athlete point of view into the equation. Kevin Garnett is one of our co-founders. He's kind of championing this movement. But at the end of the day, we really believe professional athletes know the game that sports bettors are placing bets on better than anyone. And even more importantly, because pro athletes were shielded from sports betting throughout the duration of their playing careers, they're incredibly relatable to the millions of fans learning to bet, because professional athletes, again, are learning to bet in real time as well. So they're relatable and helping onboard fans. The second lever that's really important to us is education. We really believe that whether you're an active bettor or a new fan, there's a lot of room to grow in terms of giving sports bettors and interested fans the tools and knowledge to be successful in this space. So the very first product we're getting or we're building at Gaming Society is called the Betting Academy, which will be a half master class in betting, again, teaching people how to bet, as well as a simulated free-to-play betting experience to kind of intro fans in a responsible format. And I would say the third lever of what we're doing is trying to create a fan-forward voice in this space. And what I mean by that is creating content and speaking to fans in a way that doesn't just resonate with an active bettor, but pretty much every sports fan. I really believe that sports betting, whether or not you bet, just makes sports more interesting, right? It contextualizes the storylines around your favorite teams and leagues. So by creating a voice that's more inclusive, more accessible, and just highlights the fun of betting, we really believe, again, at Gaming Society, that we can onboard the millions of fans interested in the category that are left on the sidelines.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what's interesting is that, I know a lot of current athletes obviously can't touch any gaming or gambling products with like a 10-foot pole because, just the improprieties and the credibility that would go into that. And obviously the leagues ban that. But former athletes are certainly always on the table, as well as, other athletes that might be in things like poker and so forth. So yeah, how do you look at that part of the category? It's obviously, Drew Brees is doing commercials for gaming products. You mentioned Kevin Garnett is involved with this, and other athletes as well too. So how do you look at the athlete relationship with gaming and gambling products? Both from a standpoint of how they can be involved to what is their desire to be involved with these products. I'm pretty curious to understand, what that landscape looks like, because I think that's the part that's always been kind of very taboo. And obviously with current athletes, they can't do anything or be involved with these types of products or companies.
Look, that's a really great question. And again, one that's really important to us at Gaming Society. So I mentioned Kevin Garnett being a co-founder of our company. The other co-founder is Jamie Messler, who worked for a long time in athlete representation and also co-founded the Players Tribune with Derek Jeter. And her company there kind of championed, right, including the athlete voice in terms of storytelling and content creation. At the time, when it came to creating content and media, obviously the industry has pivoted a lot since then, with a lot of athletes having their own production arms and whatnot. But at the time, media was another industry being built off athletes' backs, and I think that's what you're kind of seeing in sports betting now, right? Everywhere you look in the sports arena, whether that's with teams, with leagues, with media companies, everyone is kind of striking deals with sports books and kind of reaping the benefits of this wildly, rapidly growing industry. But athletes, once again, are kind of late to the game. And that's kind of exacerbated by the fact that, like you said, Mark, sports betting is really taboo for the duration of their playing careers. So for us, in terms of how we can kind of change that narrative and make it, or find a way that athletes can begin to monetize and contribute and be included in this category, when again, the teams and leagues that they're playing for we have a couple of ideas. Gaming Society, look, in terms of at the very base, we're doing what you're seeing across the entire sports ecosystem, which is using the voice of professional athletes through content. But what I think is really important is, when you see NBA on TNT with Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith, and they're making picks, we're not necessarily just looking at athletes as pick givers, right? We want them to just be able to talk sports and again, be able to relate to fans in a way that they're also learning to bet in real time. What's also different with Gaming Society, and I think what really separates us, is we're not just looking at athletes as marketers and content creators, but rather we're really championing them as decision makers in the industry. I mentioned Kevin being a co-founder of our company. Marissa Coleman, who's a 10+ year WNBA veteran, is leading our business development. She actually helped chair the campaign in Maryland to legalize sports betting. Michael Vick, who's the co-host of our flagship podcast, the Gaming Society Show, is an advisor to the company, and he's helped already bring in a ton of different athletes on board. But we really believe that athletes shouldn't just be, again, held to making picks and giving analysis. They should be the key decision makers in the industry. And look, part of that leadership process does turn to what you alluded to earlier in current athletes. Obviously we don't want to see current athletes making bets or even giving out analysis or insights on games that they're playing in. But again, it's really hard when you look at current athletes and the teams and the arenas that they're playing in are sponsored by sports books. If the teams and leagues can make money, shouldn't there be a way that athletes can contribute in this space as well? So look, I also forgot to mention one of Gaming Society's advisors is Neko Agumuke, who plays for the LA Sparks and the head of the WNBA Players Association. And between Kevin and Neko, we're really helping to, or we're really trying to de-blur those lines of sports betting and athlete participation, and trying to find meaningful ways that they can help expand the category in a relatable and responsible way.
Right. And so you talk about stadiums and arenas now starting to have, not just sponsorships or names of arenas or places named after these, sports betting companies, but also actually the betting kiosks or the betting counters for people to actually bet on. And so what do you think the future of the in-game or in attendance or even on TV experience is going to be like? As those lines start to, as the blurring of those lines start to be removed, what do you look at as how that's all going to fit in together? Are we going to be having alternate broadcasts when you watch a game and you can watch the, the sports betting / gambling version of the broadcast, just like, you can watch the Peyton Manning version of Monday Night Football with his brother? Are you going to, see, I guess, betting from your seat? In stadiums? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are of how those lines start to, get de-blurred over time.
Yeah, so look, I think how I would answer that question, even just 6 months or a year ago, would be totally different than now, because the truth is, sports betting kind of entering the mainstream fan experience really is already here, right? There are sports books now inside arenas, right? We're going to see one in Arizona coming online in the next couple of months. In terms of television broadcasts, we're already starting to see those alternative feeds, right, with FanDuel and the NBA. So I think the next step in terms of The de-blurring of the lines is, again, playing into the fact that on television or in arenas, you're not just speaking to an active core sports bettor or someone who's been betting for a decade and really understands the terminology and the lines and odds. But again, you're starting to reach and engage and expose the category to millions of fans who really want to have more, who want skin in the game, who want to interact more around their favorite teams and leagues, but it just feels too foreign to them. So I think the next step is really looking at a way to make sports betting more inclusive and accessible, right? It's maybe looking at prop bets, things that are maybe a little bit more casual and could be framed more easily as questions, and really making the presentation of sports in a more granular category where, again, the casual fan who maybe might not understand the point spread right away or may not understand the implications of money line odds can get in the action sooner. And I think also, too, you're going to see teams and leagues really prioritizing the responsible and educational emphasis of sports betting, making sure that as they are partnering with sports books and reaping the sponsorship dollars that come up in with it, they want to make sure that they're being responsible and making sure that their fan base, is engaging in a way that they can be successful on these platforms.
And so is that what you're doing with the betting academy? Is that going to be like a crash course in what all the terminology is and how to place bets and just the basics of betting?
Totally. So I would think of the betting academy as kind of like a half masterclass and a half simulated betting experience. So we're creating almost like Duolingo-like type courses where we want to be giving every sports fan, again, the tools to learn how to bet, from the betting basics. What is a point spread? What is a money line? What's an over under? To even the strategies that sharps would want to use, right? So what is positive EV? What does it mean when public money is on one side of the line, but sharp money is on the other? We really believe that across the board, for even the most experienced bettors, there is room to improve and be more sophisticated in the category. The grand vision of the Betting Academy, which should be launching by the end of football season, will also include the second half, which is what I was alluding to earlier, a simulated free-to-play betting experience where fans can place bets, again, without risking real money on the line, and do so in a way with a simple UI, a simple UX, getting rid of that classic 3x2 presentation of the board on traditional sportsbook platforms, and giving fans the opportunity to earn points, rewards, and prizes that are entirely unique and different from real money betting platforms.
Cool. And so are you building out technology to allow people to do that in a streamlined way, or is it going to be more manual? Or are you going to leverage other platforms for that? How's that going to look?
Totally. So everything we do, there's a gamification component, but there's also a content component. So with the Betting Academy, you're going to see the vertical living in a lot of ways. We've launched 2 newsletters, one the GS Report and one the Bet on Women newsletter. Within both of those, there's a Betting Academy section, which again is a real emphasis on a sports betting teaching moment tied to a big storyline, in whether it's in women's sports or sports at large. In our flagship show with Michael Vick and Dave Anderson, each week there's a section in that podcast labeled the Betting Academy, where again, Dave Anderson, kind of as a sports betting unicorn, a former NFL wide receiver turned betting sharp, is able to translate football analysis and insight into sports betting insights and applications. And finally, with the Betting Academy itself, it will ultimately be a mobile app that fans, can be using again to learn and place bets. But it will slowly be teasing out probably by the end of the month on our website.
That's awesome. And so what do you look at as the biggest challenge to getting, I guess people like to sign up for whether it be a newsletter or for a masterclass or, any kind of informational material if they're not already kind of really sold on sports betting, if they're not big sports bettors already? Because obviously people that are already into sports betting, they probably are out there actively seeking to find content to help them with their game. And even if they have models and stuff like that, that they themselves use, I mean, they may always want some additional information to augment that. But I don't know, take, for example, like my sister, she may not gamble or bet on sports at all. How do you reach out to her and get her excited to want to just consume this content in the first place, which is really kind of the first step to being then excited about, potentially betting on sports?
Yeah, so I think you're spot on, right? I think it is naive to assume that the millions of sports fans out there are going to go out of their way to engage with betting content when they're not already immersed in the space, and especially the case if you kind of look at the betting platforms and brands who are out there. If you look at the competitive landscape, when you read a betting newsletter or a betting article or a betting podcast, they're all kind of the same. They're very dense with betting jargon. They lean really heavily into data and insights. But essentially, they're targeting the same demographic, which is the core sharp sports bettor. Our approach is a little bit different, which is that, again, we want to reach fans who are interested in sports betting, but may not be there yet. And the way in which we're going to do that is leaning into the fact that sports bettors are just really big sports fans. And there are ways of talking about the biggest storylines in sports and the teams and leagues that everyone cares about through a sports betting lens without necessarily giving out picks or focusing on the way to win money, but rather if we can talk sports through a lens of sports betting while still leaning into all the same levers of why people love to bet beyond making money, meaning the social implications, the reason of making the games you're already watching more exciting, we believe we can lure that fan in. And I'll give you just a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's
If
gonna be
we're
my next
looking at
question.
it, if we're looking at a big game, right? So the easiest way in and what probably is most appealing to a core sports bettor is what's the sharp edge and what's the pick. But if you're just a sports fan in general, there's so many sports betting storylines that could be relevant to you, such as where's the public money at? And what do fans think about who's going to win the game? What are the futures odds about the teams playing in the game? And what are the sports books? How do the sports books think that the season is going to play out for the two teams in a matchup? What are the prop bet lines and odds within a game? And just again, how is it the storytelling in there that tells you about how a specific player in each matchup is going to perform based on the sportsbook expectations for an upcoming game? So again, we think sports betting in itself is just an interesting way in contextualizing the favorite storylines, teams, and leagues that fans care about, regardless of whether or not you're a sports bettor.
And would you kind of, I mean, maybe to also go in a little bit different direction, look at like human interest stories in the sports world and how that might impact the game. Like, I mean, I just, of course, as a Packers fan, after Brett Favre's dad passed away and he came out and had one of the best games ever in his life, that day. It seems to me like you could, play on some of that, or on the opposite end, like, some of the drama that's been going on with Aaron Rodgers in the offseason and them coming out and stinking up the joint in week one because maybe they were not focused and stuff like that. Do you think of like, possibly tying those angles in together as well?
Absolutely. And look, that's what Kevin is really passionate about, finding ways to kind of give a heartbeat to the data and analytics. And instead of leaning on some of the things you were talking about, that maybe an athlete could provide unique insight and analysis into, whether it's the referees who are officiating a game or playing inside a specific stadium, or an athlete knowing the nightlife tendencies, right, of certain athletes in the upcoming game. So there's totally ways, again, to kind of provide that qualitative, unique athlete POV in a way that's relevant, not just, again, to a sports bettor, but interesting to a fan in itself. I think every fan wants to know how Aaron Rodgers' Hawaii getaway is going to impact his upcoming season, right?
Right. And what's kind of the most common question or two that you get from novice sports bettors, or ones that are maybe like very rarely, if ever, placed a bet, but they're kind of like wanting to dip their toes in the water and get a feel for it, or they might submit their email to inquire about it, about one of your classes or newsletters or whatever. Do you get any questions that come up frequently from time to time, that you see over and over again, or what is, are they just lapping up everything you say and they're pretty just passive and wanting to hear what you have to say?
Yeah, look, I would say that some of the biggest questions you get from new bettors are really just centered around the landscape, meaning where can you bet? I think a lot of people see ads for FanDuel and DraftKings, but don't necessarily know that that's a place where—
I got to stop you right there for a second and say, I just was talking about this with someone the other day, and he's like, why am I seeing these ads for all these sports betting products and I can't even bet in my state?
Totally right. The blurring of the lines between sports books and daily fantasy, and what consumers are making of these big brands that have been out there for now close to a decade, but are just suddenly sports betting brands. I think there's a lot of confusion there. I mean, like you said, especially in states where betting is yet to come online. And I think the second question we get a lot, which I think is an important one, is there a minimum amount that you have to bet in order to participate in the category? From my research back at my Fox Sports days, what I found is that most fans are really comfortable putting a figure as low as $1 or $5 or $10 on the line. But sports betting, the American odds system is based on a $100 bet. So that in itself is incredibly off-putting to a new bettor, when again, there really is no limit how much you need to be wagering on these platforms. And you should only be doing so in a responsible way.
That's why I love decimal odds. I'm a big decimal odds user in terms of how I look at lines. I just think it's easier to figure it out because you just simply multiply your bet by that amount, and that's how much you're going to get back. And yeah, it can be for a $1 bet, and you know exactly what you're going to get back versus the system of $100 is, I don't know. I just find, we do both within Zen Sports. We offer both options, but I just find it super confusing. The American odds format. I've just really never understood the concept of it.
No, completely. And another format that I found resonates more with, or more broadly, is fractional odds, for the reason being that horse racing has been around, right, for decades, while sports betting hasn't. So seeing 4-1 or 10-1 or 7-2 a lot of times is easier to understand and interpret than certainly American odds. But I think decimal odds is also an interesting alternative.
Yeah, for sure. So it looks like you're doing some really interesting things with, getting women more into sports betting. And I think it doesn't even require that much research to realize that this is a very male-dominated industry from a customer demographic standpoint, and who works at these companies standpoint, and just kind of everything. And so, this industry really could use, definitely, a lot more female balance in it. So you're doing something at the Gaming Society called Bet on Women, both newsletter and a campaign. And so can you tell us more about what that exactly is all about?
Yeah, Bet on Women essentially is something that Jamie, our co-founder, it's been her what she has probably been most passionate about in building the whole company. And again, it's the idea of not only how can you make the category more inclusive for women's sports fans, but how can you use sports betting and gamification to propel women's sports forward? When you look at women's sports, and especially when you compare them to men's sports, they're oftentimes an afterthought in terms of innovation, right? When you look at media rights deals, women's sports leagues are often relegated to DTC or streaming platforms. When you look at sports betting, so far, that hasn't been very different. I think PointsBet became the very first sports book to announce an official league partnership with a women's sports league this season with the WNBA. But if you kind of play around on the different betting platforms, especially looking at placing bets on the women's sports leagues, other than the very basic point spread money line over under for some of these games, finding opportunities in markets to place bets are very sparse. So we really believe at Gaming Society that, look, while betting has grown so much in the US over the last 3 years, it still is a very nascent, rapidly growing category. And if we can prioritize women's sports and put women's sports at the forefront of the category by incentivizing bettors to literally bet on women, we believe that sports betting could be a solution to driving engagement, driving new audience, and driving revenue to a lot of these women's sports leagues that, again, have been hesitant or reticent in the past in embracing innovation. So Gaming Society has partnered with the WNBA Players Association, as well as One Team Partners, to do just that, to incentivize bettors to bet on women, to incentivize fans to bet on women by creating and shining visibility on the incredible athletes of women's sports, and doing so in a way that could really propel those teams and leagues.
Got it. So it's not just necessarily about getting women to bet on sports more. That certainly could be a byproduct, but it's also really as much about helping, drive engagement to women's sports, as well as, of course, additional revenue streams and opportunities for them. And then from that, because if the WNBA has more sports betting partners and more interest on betting on, for example, WNBA, then that could in turn also drive more female participants into the actual sports betting industry itself.
Yeah, I think both of those are spot on. I think by pushing the betting narrative and the embrace of sports betting and with women's sports teams and leagues, it's not just going to lead to more engagement, but it could lead to more innovation across the entire industry. And I'll just give you an example. Sue Bird wrote an article about 5 years ago on the Players Tribune, kind of calling out the W and a lot of these women's sports leagues for inadequate data and analytics tools compared to the men's leagues, in terms of improving team performance, things of that nature. That lack of infrastructure with the data and analytics capabilities extends to sports betting, right? A lot of the sports books aren't providing lines and odds because the research and numbers required to create the betting markets simply doesn't exist. So by leaning into sports betting, it couldn't just be a solve for engagement and revenue, but it could also force these women's sports teams and leagues to kind of embrace some of the other gaps that they've had in terms of the very basic infrastructure of the leagues themselves. The second thing that you touched on too, I also think is really important, which is that not only do we want to drive new audience to these women's teams and leagues, but how can we onboard, in our opinion, the incredibly undeserved but passionate fans of women's sports into the sports betting category? When you look around in terms of gaming solutions that's out there in women's sports, again, there's not a lot of options on sports books. At the same time, when it comes to fantasy sports, you really can't find many, if any, solutions out there in terms of gamification in women's sports. But when you look at the demographic makeup of the fan base of women's sports, we find that they are incredibly social. We find that they're incredibly tech and digitally savvy, right? They're used to watching their favorite teams and leagues on DTC services. And when given the opportunity, especially when tied to a political or social movement, they are willing to double down and invest in their fandom. Think of the Orange Hoodie movement in the WNBA, or the women across the movement across the country tied to the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team. So we really believe that it's an audience, while maybe sheer in size compared to the men's leagues, is very much primed in terms of being interested in sports betting if given the attention and the opportunity to literally bet on women.
Nice. That's really cool. So your official title at the Gaming Society is Head of Strategy and Analytics. So what do you specifically focus on within your job there?
So that's a great question. And frankly, at a small early stage company, it could mean a lot of things. But if I had to boil it down, my job essentially is to really understand our audience, who I think I said earlier is the 85 million both active and interested fans of sports betting, and using those insights and data we gather from our audience, as well as even anecdotes from speaking to interested consumers, and using those insights to kind of drive both our content strategy as well as a lot of our business decisions and business development, forming partnerships with teams, leagues, media companies, and sportsbooks.
Cool. And then you were at Fox Sports for a few years before that, and you got to work on some pretty exciting things like the Super Bowl and other pretty big events. So walk us through what that was like. And I'd love to kind of know why, if you're kind of working at some really amazing things at a company like Fox, just kind of curious what prompted you to go to a much smaller startup and a company just getting off the ground like Gaming Society.
Yeah. So look, I was really fortunate to, even before Fox, to have went to college at the University of Southern California, which is in the #1, or I guess compared to New York, #2 media entertainment market in the world. And being in the journalism school there, I just had incredible access to some of the most talented minds, again, in the entire industry. Going to school there kind of led naturally through a big USC alumni network to my first opportunity at Fox Sports. I actually started off in production there. My first gig was as an intern on Colin Cowherd's show, The Herd. Colin is one of the smartest, most talented people in the entire industry. And then again, quickly transition into my first full-time job into kind of a strategy research role, where, similar to my job at Gaming Society, My job was to really understand audience. Who is the Fox Sports viewer? What drives them to Fox Sports' biggest platforms, and what keeps them away? And like you said at the top, I got to work on some of the coolest events in all of sports, from the NFL to Major League Baseball to the major collegiate conferences, specifically the Big Ten, Pac-12, and Big 12. I got to work on a really awesome project tied to the Super Bowl, and the halftime show. But honestly, where I was most immersed in my time at Fox, especially near the end, was tied to the sports betting category. It was just fortuitous that at the time that I was in their strategy and analytics group, it was the time that they were the very first media company to try and launch their very first sports book. So they kind of pegged me as the research lead in that group to, again, travel around the country, go from home to home, sit in on focus groups, create surveys and quantitative research to really try and understand who is the sports bettor and who is the fan interested in betting that isn't there yet. I was really lucky, and again, I feel really privileged to have been in a place as wonderful as Fox and have been given the tools to, frankly, get smart about a rapidly growing and exciting category. And look, in terms of what led me to leave, it wasn't so much anything against Fox as much as I was being exposed to this category of sports betting. I was just excited by the growth and opportunity there, and a lot of the insights that I found in my research. Again, the knowledge and education gap tied to this space, the reason that fans love to bet for reasons beyond making money, but again, the social drivers, the drivers of doubling down on their fandom, totally aligned with what Jamie was building at Gaming Society. And it really just felt like a perfect fit. And again, just really excited at Gaming Society to continue innovating around this rapidly growing category.
So one question I've always been curious about, I don't know if you're in a position to answer it, but I'd love to know if you are. I've always found it interesting that Fox is like really the only media company that created their own sports betting app. So they have Fox Bet, for those out there that don't know this. CBS, NBC, ESPN, all the others, they've completely shied away from officially offering their own betting app. But of course, they've partnered and have advertisers in the sports betting space all over the place. So why is it that Fox was so aggressive in going out and starting their own sports betting app itself, but then all these other networks that are still so very, obviously tied into the sports and sports betting space, maybe on the partnership side, decided to shy away from them or haven't offered their own sports betting apps yet?
Yeah, look, I'll say, I think it's definitely within the Fox culture to push the envelope. They were the company that came up with the yellow first down line when watching the football game and television. Same goes for their hockey broadcast. So I think, again, being progressive with regard to sports betting, I think they just had the luxury of, compared to Disney not being, ESPN not being a Walt Disney company, which again, it's crazy to think now, but 3 years ago, sports betting, even though it was getting legalized, truly was taboo. So Fox, and again, just in its DNA, probably had the ability to be a little bit more aggressive in the category. The other thing I'll say too is, here we are again, 3 years from the time that Fox made the decision to launch Fox Bet, and each of those kind of major networks that you outlaid earlier, CBS, NBC, Disney, have kind of made drastically different decisions to embrace DTC plays, right? ESPN obviously has ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. NBC has launched Peacock, CBS has CBS All Access. Fox hasn't necessarily launched a straight direct-to-consumer media platform that is on the sports side. However, you could make the argument that sports betting is that solve for them, right? It is that direct-to-consumer platform that all the networks have bought into in terms of their bigger strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think they've always pushed the envelope, in terms of everything that they've done, not even just in sports, but also in, other content and stuff that they produce too. So I pretty much echo exactly like what you're saying there, which I think is cool. So what do you think is, obviously you're working on some really, I think, super unique ways of driving sports betting content and eventually, ways for people to learn about sports betting at Gaming Society. What do you think are some of the other things that you can talk about whether it be roadmap items or other things that could be done, just in general within the sports betting industry to make it just, I'd say, more accessible is probably it. I mean, is it more so on the legal side? Is it more so on the product side? Is it more so on the content side? I mean, what is one thing this industry can do to just start making this so much better and easier for people that want to bet on sports where they can't do it right now?
So I think I'm going to answer that question. It's a little ironic in the sense that my company is being built by a women's sports executive and a professional athlete. Two demographics you could argue are extremely underrepresented, not just in the betting category, but across all of sports. And I think when it comes to growing a new industry or reaching new audience, I think the only way you can do that is by embracing a diversity of thought. So look, I am a white male. I am only one of two at Gaming Society. And I think, look, if you want to make the category more inclusive and more accessible and reach a broader audience, that you need thought leaders at the various highest levels at your company, and you need decision makers who can pave that way and pave that charge. So again, it's strange for me to be giving that answer, but again, coming from Fox to now Gaming Society, it's something I could truly appreciate under the leadership of Jamie and Kevin.
No, I think that's an amazing answer. I mean, we definitely need more diversity, and that goes even beyond women into other categories like LGBT and other races and ethnicities. Bringing the diversity into leadership positions within sports-run companies, right? So I mean, obviously, I think we have reasonably good diversity in the sports and the athletes themselves. But of course, women's sports, I think, definitely, could use a boost, and hopefully a lot of things that you're doing at Gaming Society will help with that. But I think also just within the industry, I'm also a white male here, although I'm in the LGBT category myself. But I think that more diversity in leadership positions at these companies would also be, ideal. And it sounds like you guys are doing that at Gaming Society, which is amazing. So that, those types of different ideas and thoughts can be brought to the table versus just the same way of doing things as to how things were done 30 years ago. And I think, definitely I see, for example, like in the casino industry, they're definitely hurting to reach, younger demographics. And I think part of the problem there is you got, again, the same people sitting around the board table that were running things 20, 30, 40 years ago and not really understanding how to reach, new generations and other, diversified categories. And so totally agree with you there that, a lot of the diversification, that you're working on is also, hopefully what we'll see in other companies within the space as well. So Garrett, I mean, this has been a really awesome conversation. I love what you guys are working on. I think you're doing some really innovative and unique things, and to hopefully, bring not just sports betting, but also sports to, more people and, continue to show how fun sports betting can be and the entertainment it brings and the engagement it brings to athletes and to sports organizations. So, thanks so much again for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And lastly, how can people check out the Gaming Society? Where can they go to find the Gaming Society and or you?
Yeah. So first, again, thanks so much for having me on, Mark. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope handful of months down the line we could chat again. And I'm sure a lot will have changed as we've seen how fast this category is growing. But yeah, to check out Gaming Society, definitely sign up for our 2 newsletters, which you could do so at thegamingsociety.com. And also check out our flagship NFL show with, again, Michael Vick and Dave Anderson, the Gaming Society show. You can subscribe on pretty much any podcast platform you listen to: Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play. Yeah, check us out there, and a lot more to come in the coming weeks.
Awesome, Garrett. And that's great. Thanks again for being on the pod today. Really appreciate your time. Excited for what you're working on. Best of luck.
Thank you, Mark.